Howdy, and look at my fancy new tapestry. If you are um, watching and rather than listening. All right. Um, Hello. So today we actually have a little question from the audience. Instagram person, not an Instagram person, but somebody who follows me on Instagram asked me a question about a post I made earlier today, and I know that sounds self-important, but they asked about, can I clarify some points? And I was like, hell yeah, let's do this. So I'm gonna read it out, and I'm gonna preface that I have a lot of personal feelings about this subject, so you could probably feel them inside, but I think you can grok the basic understanding of the kind of the conversation I'm having. So the statement is, have people realized yet that one of the biological functions of wokeism may be to ensure that we don't realize that the internet is an organism? There are certain kinds of information-based organisms that get to spread when we lack the understanding that the internet itself is a living, complex system. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to feel very naive about their younger years when they realize what they thought were tools of salvation. Phrases like believe survivors, listen to black women, intersectional feminism, etc., all had their own agenda outside of anthropocentric utility, with mutations for the information age. Yeah. Sorry, my chair is a bit creaky. So I'm going to just let myself actually ground in for a moment. There's been a lot of energy, information going through my body of late, so it helps to just kind of settle my system again once. So, what do I have to say? So, one of the things, there's been a lot going on. I think I realized behind the scenes of my thinking over the last 3 or 4 years that have been shared in different iterations, but I'm realizing there's a bit of a difference between what I think I'm sharing, what I'm actually saying. So there's this internal perception of what reality is, and I'm saying things based on that, but I haven't really fully explained myself, and I don't think I'm necessarily fully going to get there, but I'd like to touch on like maybe a few basic things that I'm talking about and why this is really relevant to this conversation around wokeism, or even the bigger picture of, like, let's say the culture wars, right? So actually, hold on one second. I'm going to close the window. So one of the really key concepts or schools of study that I refer to in my understanding of animism. So this is kind of like where past, present, and future meet. There's like this kind of place where animism and memetics meet. So if you like to understand memetics more, you can just go and Google it, to be honest. But on a simple level, it's the idea that packets of information that contain things like, thoughts, behavioral attitudes, and things like that are all alive. And the word meme that is used now to mean internet memes that are funny actually means like unit of information, or even unit of culture. And there's information packaged in a unit of culture. And it's kind of like a cousin of the gene. So their gene is a replicator, keeps replicating itself. That's how it functions. And the meme is also a thing that keeps replicating itself. So that's been a really actually foundational kind of piece of understanding in my work for a while, because it links up to animism in the sense that, like, when we think about all things are beings, then we, and all beings are interrelated, we want to include things like our thoughts are beings, words are beings. And the nature of those beings, I think, is something we should consider. And, when we think about all things being interrelated, I think we tend to, I had a recent kind of plant medicine journey, which revealed to me, like, when we think all things are interrelated, we tend to have this kind of positive spin on that, and that all things are beings. We want to go a little bit further and realize that means, like, even surrounded by information, or like information as beings, that means we're always kind of in the wild a bit, in the sense that information has its own agenda outside of our use, like what we think is useful. So that's like kind of what my main post is about. Information, if it's really alive, then it can have, and it does have, in my view, agendas that are not related to what we think it's useful for. So, for example, let's say a hashtag like Believe Survivors. For certain people, and myself too, it's been useful to re-educate ourselves about sexual violence, the prevalence of it, and all these things. But it's also important to recognize that the hashtag itself has a replicator, right? Because you see the hashtag replicate, and then you see all the information and behavioral attitudes attached to that hashtag replicate itself through our culture. That has an agenda of its own. So the meme has a kind of replicating function. And so this is distinct from what we use it for, right? And I think this is really important to be able to separate that. And one of the deep criticisms I've had about the social justice left always essentially is this thing we call memetic possession. This is kind of like a term that me and Sohei have been using for a while. So memetic possession is basically what the elders called spirit possession. It's really the same thing. And so, for example, let's say, like the meme of Believe Survivors, that's really, popular. Like, if somebody says they've been harmed, you must believe it. Like, that's kind of like the most standard, I think, replicated version of it, right? There's different versions of memes under the same name, and that gets more complicated. I'll probably write something in the future about that, but in the simplest sense, let's say the most popular version of the Believe Survivors meme is less the one that is like, oh, if somebody comes to you, you want to hear them out and weigh all the things and respond appropriately. The most, I would say, or at least one significant replicated version of the Believe Survivors meme is, if somebody comes to you and they say if they've been harmed sexually, then they must be telling the truth. Or you must act as if they're telling the truth, like believe them. So that is, let's say, the meme. And what happens is that people use memes, or essentially units of information, to stabilize their psyche. So when we are in situations that are confusing, we don't know what to do, because trauma is very complicated. Like, when we really talk about things like sexual harm and hurt, situationally, it's an extremely complex situation. The reality around trauma is, yes, people, like, lose memory when they're in a traumatic event. That's absolutely real. So you can't hold people to those standards. At the same time, people have false memory. People lie, actually. This is personality behavior patterns. And people really misread and project their own stuff onto events. This is all true. All of that is true. So when our human system is not able to deal with that kind of complexity, right, and the unknown, we tend to try to use memes in a very particular way to stabilize our system. And that is to show absolute devotion to it. And that would mean something like, essentially, what we would call your memetic ecosystem, your information ecosystem, becomes monocropped on a certain subject. So for people who are really on, are still on that kind of believe survivors train, and the most kind of, I would say, like, least sophisticated and least complex version of that meme, which is probably the most popular one, I would say, just how memes go. Their systems tend to be monocropped, so their ecosystem is kind of wiped out by, like, there aren't other viewpoints to consider. There's only this one meme that they have access to. And one of the things that happens when memes get threatened is their survival and replication response is tied into our nervous system. So whenever a human being can become the representative of the meme trying to protect its territory. They become fused one into each other. And that's what we call memetic possession. And essentially, it is the essence of spirit possession. This can happen with, again, to explain this more in granular detail, we need something else, probably another conversation, but it can be ancestral possession, ancestral ghost possession. Like, that's all information, right? Ancestral trauma. And so all those are forms of possession, and memetic possession especially is this kind of, like, the most basic behavior is like these, like, you can say, these information entities that are very popular have a very simple, not complicated structure that people use to stabilize your psyche. You know, they get possessed by them, and they become defenders of the meme. So what I mean by memetic possession is that actually the person is no longer there. So the person's dissociated into a trauma response, and the meme is now acting on, the meme is acting through the person. I think I have to probably think about this a little bit more, how the meme and the nervous system interact. That's a little bit at the edge of my thinking, and how they kind of bind to each other. But and there's a lot more that I can talk about, but I'm just trying to keep the conversation small enough. But yeah, so you see this kind of very, like, devoted memetic structure in a lot of ideological communities. So the social justice left is definitely one of them. And yeah, so people use memes to really stabilize their psyche. And what the culture wars then really is actually a turf war between memes in the marketplace of our of our psyche. So our collective unconscious, if you can think of it as like as an ecosystem or a marketplace, it's the memes are actually butting in on each other, forming camps together, and actually in conflict with each other, like any kind of natural system. And this is what I mean, that when you take that animist understanding of all things are beings and all beings are interrelated, we tend to, I think, in a lot of kind of happy-go-lucky versions of animism, wash over the complexities and horrors of that. Because what it actually really means is that you're actually still in the wild in a lot of ways. You're still exposed to a lot of nature in fighting itself. And essentially, oppression is kind of one of the ways that's happening. So that's basically the idea. And of course, okay, so here I might also introduce another concept that this person called Susan Blackmore, I found out about recently, describes a third replicator. And I'm not sure how I totally feel about separating as a third replicator. I think I might use a different terminology, but it doesn't really matter for the sake of this conversation. So she talks about genes, memes, and the third replicator being Tremes. So Tremes are things like apps and stuff that have. My understanding is that Tremes means technology memes, or I don't know what the R is for, but it's kind of like beings that, I guess, bridge the material world and the information world. So technology, information technology especially. So inside of this way of thinking, then the internet itself as a network is a living organism. And I don't think that's like actually necessarily a new idea, but like it's a big part of how I understand the psyche as well. Like there's a real fractal relationship there. But when we understand it that way, you see that, um, you know, the internet itself that we're hooked into, that I'm going to be speaking into, releasing stuff into, has its own agenda. Again, like memes, Tremes have their own agenda. Although I would call the internet actually a meme from my purpose, because I see all things as information anyway. So genes, memes, Tremes are all the same. They're actually all memes to me. They're all units of information. But yeah, the internet being a living complex system that is essentially transporting other living beings all around it to different people and spreading. So that's the thing I think that's really important for us to understand. And I would say, within the internet as an organism, it's because it's a network, complex, distributed organism. It can have aspects of itself. Let's just say, let's posit that it doesn't want to be discovered. That is alive. Or maybe that's like one of the functions of it. Intent is a weird thing, right? But I'm just going to ascribe it a little bit of intent. Just imagine there's a part of the internet that doesn't want to be found out what it's doing. And when we think about that, my perception of wokeism is that it has this function to kind of hide that information is alive. And so is the internet because of that. That is to say that when your being is completely taken over by information, right? It you don't have a you don't have you don't have a personhood that can look at the information, go and say, wait a second, you and I are not the same. And so the very nature of ideological ways of understanding the world, I think, is directly connected to kind of hiding this kind of, I'd say, reality that information is alive. That means the internet is alive. And that means all the hashtags being traded on it are alive. Everything is alive. That's what we're doing it in. And I think it's a very interesting, I can share another thing, for example. So let's say like Mark, when we talk about, let's say Facebook and its problems, we blame Mark Zuckerberg, right? We're like, Zucky is the bad guy. Well, here's something maybe to consider. That Facebook is moving through Mark Zuckerberg, and it's not necessarily Mark Zuckerberg controlling Facebook. We tend to see humans having this anthropocentric agency in our lives, and I think that's kind of problematic. But when we switch that over into thinking that, wait a second, maybe Facebook actually has the same agency over Mark. And this is particularly interesting because I was just reading an article, that Steve Jobs, who's famously dropped a lot of LSD and had a lot of spiritual experiences that are part of his empire building of Apple. And I'm speaking on an Apple computer right now, right? That he had the similar advice to Mark Zuckerberg, and apparently he's taken some of the advice at a very pivotal time in Facebook's history. So I think from that, something we might really consider is that the world as we know it is really, and the power players in it, a lot of those people are people who have had big psychedelic spiritual experiences where they've seen kind of the code of how consciousness and the universe and how these things all work. They have this big experience of the world. So I think that's everybody from like Donald Trump to Putin to like probably Jeff Bezos, and you don't have to have had psychedelic medicine experiences to have psychedelic visions of the world, right? Those are not the same thing. They can just be induced. There's people like Steve Jobs. A lot of people in Silicon Valley have definitely have psychedelic visions. So a lot of the people who are at the top of the world food chain are movement starters, are people have had those kind of experiences. Oh, and also another interesting thing is like somebody like Gavin McInnes, who is the founder of the Proud Boys. So, and this actually, when I read this actually changed my idea what, all this stuff that people are talking about social justice left. It was a while ago, but I read Gavin McInnes, who's the founder of the Proud Boys, his autobiography, just like a part of it. But what's really interesting, if you read his autobiography, is that the moment he started moving towards founding the Proud Boys was when he I think his wife is indigenous, and so he has access to indigenous rituals through his wife's side, and he participated in a sweat lodge, and he documents that in the sweat lodge he had this big spiritual experience that was, my read, way over his threshold, and he came out of it kind of, essentially what he says is kind of like, fuck it, fuck this world. So I think these kind of things are really, really important for us to understand what's going on around us. Even like, let's say, even in what we call, QAnon and conspirituality. Think about this. So we're going through the COVID pandemic, right? And at the same time, there's been a huge thing called, whatever we might call it, the psychedelic renaissance. So what people more than any other time are starting to, maybe not more than any other time, but again are interested in doing plant medicines or psychedelics. And the pandemic means they're doing it quite isolated. And while they're isolated, while they're doing psychedelics, they are plugged into the internet. Think about that. And think about the internet being a portal for these living organisms that are information based, and the internet itself is a bridge between the information world and the material world in a tangible way. So what's happening when people open up their psyche and they're seeing all these things? They're seeing the code of how the world works. So that's really what all this conspirituality stuff is, or even like what you call therapy is that. Therapy is just always trying to explain how does this world work? Okay. The thing that people we fuck up is that we don't realize this code that we are seeing, that we're being shown for whatever experience. It could be through plant medicine, it could be through psychedelics, it could be through meditation, whatever, or we can just be born with it. The information itself is alive and has its own agenda to replicate. Even as I speak this thing that I'm saying has its own agenda. It's not just me here right now. And I think something I try to do, and I'm speaking for myself and the information coming through me at the same time, I know that sounds spooky, but is self-awareness and transparency that is happening. Because when you look at what we call cult dynamics, there is that lack of transparency. So people come from the mountain, with tablets, prophecy. What they don't tell you is that the tablets are alive. And maybe they didn't reach that understanding even. So there is, whether or not information is valuable to us, there's something that we might call memetic possession happening. It's not a matter of it being useful or not. The problem part is whether we realize it's alive. And so when we realize something is alive, we can have agency in response to it. That's what really at the core and heart of animism is, my understanding, is that you're able to have agency in your relationship to beings that are not easily visible or tangible. So that's a lot of what that is something that Dare has taught me a lot. So I encourage you to go check out Underworld Party. I don't know if they specifically touch on that, but it's infused in their way of understanding the world. So that's kind of really what's happening. So everything that I'm seeing here is alive too, and it's outside of Tada. and I'm aware that is happening. And I think this is something that's really interesting and important about the current place where we are in history, because I think this place where somatics, memetics, animism, and all this stuff meet, it's creating like this vortex where past, present, and future kind of come together. So I think we are really at that edge. And of course, all points in history are interesting, but I think particularly I'm kind of like, no, this time is pretty interesting. It is a kind of like, there was this big dissociative expansion in, through the modern Enlightenment, where things got very thinky, and people lost touch with a kind of intangible world and how to manage it, right? Because you see, the elders and ancients kind of like understood and understand that information is a lie, so you have to manage your relationship with it. It's one of the most important tasks people have in their life, and that's why people who are experts at seeing information and working with it are community leaders. And actually, that hasn't changed in a way. The people who are community leaders are people who are expert at manipulating information. Doesn't mean that they're being held accountable. Doesn't mean we understand what they're doing. Doesn't mean that they understand that they're being possessed. So they're expert manipulators of information, but they're getting manipulated by the information as well. Or they think they're expert manipulators of information, but what's happening? Does that make sense? It's a bit of a contradiction or paradox that's happening there. Yeah, so I think this culture wars question and the culture, is a very, very important one. And it's very tangible to me that this understanding of information is alive, and therefore ideologies are alive and trying to wage war on each other, that through humans, and we're being essentially used as pawns. And if you want to get really cynical about it, that is what's happening. And I think there's a very tangible difference between people who understand those things and people who don't. And that's something that I feel like I've been really shown through how people behave in the social justice industrial complex, because the social justice industrial complex is run over still by people who are not transparent about their memetic ecosystem. Or another way to say that is their sense of wanting to save the world and the salvation is tied into the spread of memes. And the memes themselves love it, but the meme's agenda is not to save humanity or liberate or anything necessarily. It has a separate, like if you want to look at it this way, let's say if you think a hammer is alive, one of the hammer's agenda is to, like, okay, maybe you can say it loves hammering nails, sure, but one of its agendas is to replicate itself, right, as a piece of information. And the human being's agenda is to hammer the nail, right? So, I know that's a little bit simplistic, but we want to differentiate the information we share versus ourselves, and the information somebody's sharing versus the person. So this is also why it explains that why are so many people who are famous and have big platforms and written books and stuff fail? They show that they cannot back up what they're about, their values and their actions don't align. Well, there's a very good reason. That's actually a feature, not a bug, because the information they're sharing through their platforms are memes. It's not necessarily who they are. Or often when people have big careers that evolve around memes, that means that they're a portal for memes to come through into the world and materialize, right? Whatever you can, any kind of you can call it embodied activism, you can call it ancestral healing, all that stuff. Those are memes. And they're trying to manifest into the world through certain people who gain a certain kind of power and take on a prophetic role. And often those people end up in what we would call possessed states, where they're acting on behalf of the meme itself and have lost a sense that the information itself has an agenda that is not their own. And so the things that happen are like, well, I think we can take another episode and talk about that, or can we? Well, I mean, I think that's what we call, okay, and that's what the essence of narcissism is. I know this because as a person who is highly memetically tapped in and a portal myself, I'm very glad. The last 2 to 3 years of my life, I've actually been essentially chronically ill and disabled. Like while I've been most productive on the outside, I've actually been in bed. I can take very few clients. There's weeks on end I couldn't get out of bed other than going to the corner store that's 100 meters away, and I've had chronic pain for like weeks straight. Like literally, wake up in the morning to sleep at night. There's chronic pain, chronic migraine pain. So there's a certain way in which I can take advantage of the fact that all this information is coming through me, and kind of the cancellations that have come towards me related to my character and stuff. Which you can, yeah, which is essentially for me the ecosystem fighting back, because whenever you point out something that, hey, maybe this is da-da-da, then the ecosystem, because it's alive, it's going to resist. So I'm pretty aware that I've been, part of this is like I've been attacked by people who are pawns of memes that I've threatened. Essentially, I've been like, hey, I think and I'm representing a meme, right? So these memes are fighting, and then in the process of that, I've definitely gotten canceled. But in some ways, I think I'm lucky, because that really revealed to me what, it didn't allow me to, or I don't know, I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. So, because that's just not a safe thing to say, or not a wise thing, like to say that I'll never be captured by narcissism, because, like everybody has that, right? Everybody has those thoughts in the morning and stuff. But it didn't allow me to capitalize on the momentum of my career at the time, which I think, on the other hand, is to say that memetically, I was able to prevent myself from being possessed completely. For sure, I'm possessed somewhat, or you can call it channeling, right? So when you're essentially in a possessed state, but you have agency, that's what people call channeling. Channeling versus possession, it's a matter of agency, as far as I understand it. And we try to gain more agency. So, so this is the issue that we're in. And so I was pretty clear about what was happening in my industry from that vantage point, and seeing a lot of famous people. And, I know, when I hear, like, when I interact with them, I'm like, ooh, no, 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 no. Yeah, and it is like, it is memetics. It is memetic possession. A lot of it. That's what status is. So, this does put me in a complex position, because, I can't deny I'm a kind of modern prophet, quote unquote. Like, I bring tablets from the mountain to share. I bring information from other realms to share with the world. That's kind of like what I do. And that sounds really extraordinary, but it's not. It's just normal. It's like whenever we're thinking something, that's what we're doing. We're just pulling information from the cloud a lot of the time. So, but I'm a person whose kind of livelihood and career is based around that. So it's very real. This like tying in of like survival, pleasure, seeking of pleasure, and needing to be this constant memetic portal, right? So, yeah, I'm trying to be a better channeler, understanding possession states. But it is delicate, because I am like gearing up, I think, right now I think a simple way to say is become a lot more, again, quote unquote, known. So that means the memes I steward are more visible in the world. And one of the ways I'm trying to, and this is human really speaking, probably, or it's not, but it is and it isn't. But I mean, yeah, it's all memes. But one of the ways I'm trying to do it, and this is a meme I'm introducing, right, is to really think about building culture. So Um, I don't think there'll ever be a time that I won't be a field leader of some kind, because I already am, I guess. I'm saying all this stuff pretty reluctantly, just so you know, but I'm really trying to face my reality of the position I'm in, because I often confuse how people perceive me and my internal state, my own insecurities and stuff. I misperceive my own self, I think, in the world. And so I'm trying to change that. So I'm just trying to be as honest as I can about who I am and what I do and where is my place as I try to find it. But yeah, like moving towards a culture, like information is shared, but it's like a culture. It's a culture. And this comes back to kind of like my earlier conversations around um, like how the healing world and evolves around choreography. So people get on a stage and they perform their thing, and the audience absorbing it is like, ah, and then the memes pass through them into their passing it through into their body through that process. The place more where I'm going though is I think if you've seen the seen or listened to the podcast up to now, it's about dancing with information. So rather than just choreography, or even choreography at all, we're playing with information. So having some agency over information. We're playing it like music with each other, and it's more of like this community activity to play with information. And that's really what I'm a street dancer, so when you get into a dance circle, that's what it is. You're playing with information. You're playing with geometries, like squares, whatever. You're playing with like infinity loops, and you're playing with different timings that are all information. So you're playing with information. So I'd really like to explore what healing looks like when it moves towards that kind of understanding of what it is. And in some ways, I think healing or therapy is going to be an outdated term, or is an outdated term to me. It's not. It's kind of like it is. It is definitely useful, in the sense that, but I think when we hit certain stages of advanced practitionership, we start to look at I think we want to start. Okay, I'm gonna rewind a little bit. Like we want to start thinking more about and rather than helping people, what does it mean to initiate people? In the sense of, rather than like a person who's better off saving somebody and helping somebody who's worse off, we might think of it more and include this, not just that, but like what processes does a person need to become a fully formed, and this is all kind of arbitrary, right? The line of that, but more fully full person to participate in a culture in a healthy way. And this is what initiation is. What kinds of information does that person need to have to be able to do that? And I think one of the very important key goals, key metrics, is whether a person can dance with information, have a diverse memetic ecosystem, and maintain it for themselves. Because when a person loses track of their memetic ecosystem's diversity, and they get possessed by ideology, they get possessed by ideas, they're essentially that person who's taking like a torch and lighting houses on fire in the village. Yeah, so that's an interesting. I said the word initiation. I'll be real that I feel like I've been going through one through the cancellations, and it's brought me to a place I need to be even more clear about where I'm going, who I am, what I'm doing. And even when I've been talking to Dare, and you can go to their website, you'll see that even for them, and I actually take the lead from them on this, is that like their understanding of what therapy or healing is changing. It is actually like, if you go work with them, it's an initiatory process. That's kind of like their framing. So and I really agree with that, ultimately because I've, for a while I've seen all this, whatever we call anti-racist kind of healing or whatever, anti-misogynistic healing or whatever. We don't want to lose sight of the goal, that the goal is to um, steward more human beings that are able to participate in community in a healthy way and have the basic skill sets that we really, really lack. And this is even more and more important as information or memes become even bigger part of our lives, because the internet is spreading each day. Like, I'm putting information in the internet today that cultivates and brings it up to the next level myself. So that's going to keep happening. And so there's an interest in us really seeing that information is alive and really learning how we can work within it in our bodies. How memes in the body are connected, I have some thoughts, so I'm not going to share them all yet. I've also because there's a few parts that are not clear to me yet, so I'm holding back. And it might be shared in a piece of writing or a podcast, but so thank you for listening in. So so if you're watching the video, you probably notice there was a little cut. If there's audio, you don't. But I'm actually just coming back on. We finished the main podcast, but I was like, oh, we should add some praxis at the end because, I think it's just a helpful thing to do when you've talked a lot. So help the information digest. So I think in particular, it's the idea that thoughts and emotions and sensations are beings. It can become very like, maybe even like, whoa, it's a lot. It might be a lot to take in. So we might take an opportunity to sit with ourselves and kind of allow that piece of information to metabolize, which is also actually a big part of working with memes well. And something I'd like to introduce as a kind of what I would call an anti-meme meme, in the sense that it's a meme that can counteract other memes. I like to introduce a praxis of the unknown, or non-duality, or the Tao, or death, or eros. There's different names, but we're going to work with it tangibly in our body. And this is the place where the praxis that we call hara cultivation becomes very useful. So you might find, a comfortable sit and rub your hands together to create some warmth. And you want to apply your hands a little bit underneath your navel. Okay. And you imagine inside there's a glowing ball of light you can breathe into. You're gently breathing in. So something you might find helpful about this ball of light is that this place called hara in your body, which is center of gravity, it's also connected to the very center of the universe, because all things are connected through gravity and through its gravitational center. So when you actually connect to your center of gravity, you actually effectively connect to the center of the universe. And in many indigenous cultures, this would be called the womb of the universe. So, but what we're going to do then is we're going to take the thoughts and sensations and feelings that we have that are like maybe a bit stimulating to us, or they've been loosened because we've been just realized like, whoa, all these things that are me, they're actually alive and also not me, which is a little bit of a confusing place to be if you're in modern civilization. Just allowing your thoughts, emotions, and sensations to be dropped into your belly. You can imagine just them being taken back to kind of the very center or the womb of the universe where all things come out of. So essentially, you're just sending these thoughts, emotions, and sensations to the womb of the universe. You're reconnecting them. And you might feel your belly get warm. You might feel digestion sounds, or sorry, hear digestion sounds or feel digestion. And you also might get turned on even. For some people that happens. Yeah, so I'd invite you to keep even dropping any memes that are significant for you. So even those things, memes that you feel like help you, you can just imagine them dropping into your belly. Because just because they're helpful doesn't mean that they're under your control, right? This is something that humans really get confused about. So even if there's a big spiritual practice you rely on, like Buddhism, just drop it in there, see what happens. Or meditation, just even the idea of meditating like we're doing right now, drop itself in there. And you might even notice that as you drop all these things, there's a small piece of information maybe coming back upstream, back along the along your spine or your central Taiji pull. And that piece of information that's come through the womb again reaches your mind, and it kind of goes poof. And it's very like small and light. And that's it. So yeah, that's a practice I encourage everybody to do. Hara cultivation all day, every day. Yeah, and again, hara, or being connected to the womb of the universe, allows you to be in a state of unknown, which I think is very, very important in the sense that information is being, so something that really helps counteract it is a form of information that's almost kind of like a non-information. And that's what I mean at the anti-meme meme. You want to cultivate something in your system that can hone in all these things that you're using all the time to stabilize your psyche. You have so when you are needing to transition between memetic ecosystems, you're able to do it because you're able to anchor into something else while that's happening. So you're able to stabilize in the destabilization, as Dare often says. So yeah, I really invite people to practice that and really realize that this is very simple stuff, but this is actually the foundation. And when this stuff is ignored, whatever that we're doing, we can call it activism, we can call it going about our lives. Inevitably, we do things and or become agents of things that we probably reflect back later and become really unhappy about. So, yeah. Anyways, blessings, and talk to you all again or something like that sometime soon.